Yo, what's up guys? Today I'm going to be doing an installment in the Brews from Scratch series where I record myself building a deck completely from the start and talking you through my thought processes as I'm going. So in this episode I'm going to be doing Historic Best of 1 Dredge, or I guess it's probably Dredgeless Dredge, right, because we don't have any of the actual Dredge cards, but with the release of Shadows over Innistrad Remastered, we get the addition of Prized Amalgam to the format, which is one of the most important cards in these Dredge style decks where you're just trying to mill yourself and then get a bunch of creatures into play off the top of your library for free. So a little bit of background on this, because I don't normally do best of 1, right? I normally do best of 3, but I tried really hard to get this style of deck to work in best of 3. The big issue is that these sorts of decks are just super all in on the graveyard. So post sideboard, when people bring in graveyard hate against you, it's very difficult to win unless you consistently have an answer to that graveyard hate. So I tried a ton of different builds in best of 3. I tried Sultai, I tried Grixis for stuff like Ox of Agonis, and I just felt like I got too blown out by graveyard hate. I also tried a transformational sideboard where I would be Dredge game 1 and have a lot of mill spells that can mill both you and the opponent, so stuff like Mesmeric Orb and Jace the Perfected Mind and stuff like that. And then I tried pivoting to mill, so I would bring out all the Dredge cards and then board into stuff like Ruin Crab and Tasha's Hideous Laughter and stuff. And that was an interesting idea, but the issue was having to run mill spells that mill both you and the opponent isn't ideal. You really want to be running stuff like Stitcher's Supplier and Otherworldly Gaze in order to just speed up your deck game 1. And then the issue with pivoting to mill is that mill just isn't good against certain decks, right? It's not good against Phoenix, it's not good against Reanimator or Kethis, or any sorts of decks like that, and also has a sketchy matchup against the very fast aggro decks as well. So I found myself in an awkward spot games 2 and 3 against those sorts of decks where you either have to just stick to the Dredge game plan game 1 and potentially get blown out by graveyard hate, or if you pivot to mill, you can just mill the opponent, and unless you find your graveyard hate, you're just going to be helping their game plan as well. So unsurprisingly, this deck didn't really work in best of 3 because of graveyard hate, and the more I played with the Dredge style archetype, the more I realised that you really just want to be super all in on trying to be as fast as possible, and the only real place you can do that is in best of 1, so that's why we're building it here. Another quick thing that I was kind of hesitant about this deck overall in best of 1 as well, because you're super all in on the graveyard, and the issue with this deck is you're doing a reasonably fair thing compared to the other graveyard decks. So my hesitation about this archetype was, if you're going to be super all in on the graveyard in best of 1, then you're probably better off just playing something like Dragonstorm or Reanimator or Greasefang that closes games out a lot more consistently quickly. But I realised the big difference between this Dredge style deck and the other graveyard decks in the format is all the other graveyard decks are very focused on targeting specific stuff in the graveyard, right? So the Reanimator deck wants to get its reanimation targets in the graveyard, Greasefang wants to get Parhelion in the graveyard, etc. So you want to be running looting effects in that rather than mill, whereas Dredge just wants to mill. It doesn't really matter what goes in the graveyard because you have such a high density of stuff you want to mill. So there's one card that makes me think that this could be a good idea in best of 1, and that is Rotten Reunion. So this is a card that you can mill over, and then you just have graveyard hate from milling yourself. So I feel if you run a Dredge style deck with 3 or 4 Rotten Reunion and a ton of mill, then you're actually a graveyard deck that has a good matchup against the other graveyard decks. And then I could see an argument to running this over something like Dragonstorm or Reanimator because you have an edge against those other graveyard decks. Whereas, stuff like Dragonstorm and Reanimator doesn't really want to run a ton of mill. They want to run looting effects to get specific cards in the graveyard. So this is kind of the reason why I'm optimistic that this deck could have a legit spot in the metagame. So for those of you who don't know the Dredge style archetype in general, Prized Amalgam is a very key card. We just want to run a lot of stuff that we get immediate value for free by milling it. So that's stuff like Creeping Chill, which drains the opponent for 3 whenever you mill it over. And then alongside Creeping Chill, you've got Silver Smoke Ghoul, which works really nicely with it. So Silver Smoke Ghoul is a creature... Oh, hold on, I can't spell. It's a creature that comes back if you gain 3 or more life during your turn. So this obviously works very nicely with the Creeping Chill. If we have Silver Smoke Ghoul in the graveyard and we mill over a Creeping Chill during our turn, we get the Ghoul back, which also gets the Amalgam back, which is nice. Then another card that's just an absolute staple in these sorts of decks is Narcomoeba. So this is just a creature that we get into play for free by milling it. Again, works really, really well with the Prized Amalgam, because if we have the Amalgam in the graveyard and we mill over the Narcomoeba, we then trigger the Amalgam to get it back later. And then the last card that I think I'm definitely going to want in some numbers, but I'm not sure I want in as a 4 of, is Haunted Dead. So I'm going to put a couple in for now. I could see going up to 3, but the nice thing about this card is we have a lot of cards in the deck, like all of these cards here, we don't really want to draw. We kind of want these in the graveyard, right? We're never thrilled to be hard casting the Narcomoeba. Hard casting Creeping Chill if you have Silver Smoke Ghoul in the graveyard is going to be reasonable, but in general, you really don't want these cards in your hand. You want them in the graveyard. And Haunted Dead, we can mill over and then use it to pitch these cards in the graveyard. Specifically, it works really nicely with Prized Amalgam, because if we've drawn Prized Amalgam, we discard it as a cost, and then we bring back the Haunted Dead from the graveyard, which immediately triggers the Prized Amalgam. So this is just another way for us to trigger the Prized Amalgam, and also allowing us to ditch any of these cards that we draw as well. So don't think we want 4 copies of this, but we'll have to see how the numbers work. So these are the core cards to mill over. There's also another card called Wonder, which is an interesting card. So this is a card that when it's in the graveyard, it gives all your creatures flying if you have an island. My main issue with this card is that, first of all, I think I'm going to be running a lot of dual lands. I imagine we're going to be running a relatively low land count in this deck, because you don't really need a lot of lands. You're not really going to want to hard casting this in a lot of situations, and so I'm probably going to be running a lot of blue-black dual lands, which aren't islands. So because you have to have an island to trigger this, I'm not sure we need it. And the other thing is, the matchups where flying could be useful, like against wizards or elves or Heliog or Angels, for example, I think those matchups are already going to be really tough for this deck, and I don't think Wonder's going to help that much. But the main thing that I'm not interested in this for is this: I want to run a ton of blue-black dual lands, and I just don't think I'm going to consistently have an island for this. So these are the kind of payoffs I imagine straight away. I'm going to have a quick search to see if I'm missing anything else, but I think these are the main ones. So basically the rest of the deck is just going to be mill for the most part. So I'm going to do a quick search for mill, and I'm basically going to search for 1, 2 and 3 mana. I really don't want to be running anything at the 3 mana. It's mainly 1 and 2 because you really want to be getting off to a fast start with this deck for sure. So the mill options we have, obviously we can only pick stuff that mills ourselves, so Secret Keeper is definitely a consideration. Milling 4 for 1 mana is pretty huge. In best of 1, you really want to be getting off to fast start, so 1 mana mill is definitely something that I'm quite interested in. Ruin Crab would be great if you could target yourself, but you can't, unfortunately, so that's not really an option. Then Founding the Third Path, I don't think we're going to be running enough instants or sorceries for this, unfortunately, so I don't think that's going to be a good option either. Maddening Cacophony also seems reasonable, but you can only mill the opponent, so that doesn't really work. Compelling Argument, I'm going to put this in just as a consideration, but considering we already have the mill 10 for 2 mana, I'd be kind of disappointed if we end up running this as well, just because it's so much worse. And then we're already at 3 mana here. There is Jace the Perfected Mind is a really efficient, it's for the amount of mana you invest, it's an efficient amount of mill, but in best of 1, I really don't want to be running stuff that isn't 1 or 2 mana mill if possible, because like I said, getting off to a fast start is so crucial. The earliest you're going to get Jace down is turn 3, which is just way too slow in my opinion, so not really that interested in that. Stitcher's Supplier seems absolutely great here, right? It's, mill 3 when it enters the battlefield. It's 1 mana mill, like I said, with Secret Keeper is very interesting. Works as a blocker. If it dies, we get even more mill, so very interested in that. There's also Gnawing Vermin, but it only mills 2. I think, even though the death trigger on this is nice at killing opposing creatures, there are a lot of matchups where the opponent isn't going to have early creatures, and I think just having a high amount of mill early on is very important. And then, we outside of that, the 2 mana stuff, we've already got a 2 mana mill 5, so all of these 2 mana mill 3s aren't really that appealing to me. And then I want to get onto the blue-black dual land. So, Glimpse the Unthinkable, I think this is going to be one of the most powerful cards in the entire deck. This card is so good. Mill 10 for 2 mana. It's such a great rate, and like I keep saying, I think just getting off to a fast start and milling yourself a lot in the first couple turns is going to be really important. The other main reason why I don't really want to go higher than 2 mana mill stuff, other than the fact, like I've said, I want to get off to fast starts, is that I want to run a relatively low land count, because the nice thing about this deck is we're getting all of our stuff into play for free. So ideally, I want to be running a deck where you can just win off 2 lands and you don't even need to find your 3rd land in a lot of scenarios. So outside of that, I think the only other card that I'm really interested in here is Mesmeric Orb. This is another really powerful card. It doesn't get you that much high density of mill immediately, right? When you play this, if you play this on turn 2, you're only going to be milling for 2 straight away, but the fact that this mills over the course of the game is really huge and just gives you inevitability, right? If this keeps ticking up every single turn. You're going to be milling more and more cards and getting more and more stuff into play. Now, the one downside of this is it does mill the opponent as well, which is obviously going to help them if they're also running a graveyard deck, but the fact that we're running Rotten Reunion really helps to mitigate that in a lot of ways, I think. Altar of Dementia is another really interesting option as well. I don't think it's that good in Best of One specifically, or in this particular build anyway, because, like I said, all we want to do is just get a high density of mill as quickly as possible. And Altar of Dementia is a little slow, but I can see builds where this could be good if you built more like a combo deck out of it, but for now, definitely interested in Mesmeric Orb. And then there are some cards that don't come up over mill that I really want to be running. So Otherworldly Gaze is a really, really good card in this sort of deck. Surveil 3 for 1 mana is essentially mill 3, but you get to pick a card to keep on the top if you want, and then you can flash it back. Not only that, but you're obviously going to be milling it into your graveyard as well. So this is really great because once you've exhausted all of the mill that you have in your hand, you're probably going to have milled some of this into your graveyard, which then enables you to mill further from the graveyard. So Otherworldly Gaze, absolute 4 of here. And then another card that I really, really like, but I'm not 100% sure is going to be fast enough, is Oglor. Oh, hold on. There we go. So Oglor, this is a really interesting card because what this essentially does is at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to pick one card to go into your hand and pick one card to go into the graveyard. And then whenever a creature gets put into your graveyard from your library or your hand, so if you mill it over or you discard it to a Haunted Dead, for example, then it perpetually gains, when it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 token. So if you can get this down on turn 2 and then you mill, then every Prized Amalgam or Silver Smoke Ghoul or Narcomoeba that you get from the graveyard also produces an additional 2/2. Now, this card was really sweet in a lot of the best of 3 decks I was playing. Obviously, being a 1/1 does mean that it's vulnerable to a ton of different removal, but I just feel like in best of 1 it's going to be too slow. Like I said, getting off to fast starts is really, really important. The way you're going to beat other creature decks is by committing to the board really quickly, and I just feel like Oglor's too slow. You know, at 2 mana when we already have mill 10, or we already have a card that's probably going to mill, 10 or 15 cards over the course of a game, I think Oglor is just too slow, but which it's kind of gutting because I absolutely love this card. I really want it to be good, but in best of 1, I think it's a little bit too slow, unfortunately. So I think these are the main mill enablers that I'm interested in. I'm absolutely running for Glimpse, absolutely running for Mesmeric Orb, sorry, and I really want to be running for Stitches Supplier and for Otherworldly Gaze as well. And then, so I'm not 100% sure about Compelling Argument or Merfolk's Secret Keeper. I think with this sort of deck, with the best of 1 hand smoother, I think I would be happy running 20 lands. So let's just cut 4 lands from here. I'll build the mana base in a little bit. So if we do run 4 of all of these cards, then we've only got room for 1 extra mill spell, I think. So to be honest, I'm not sure we need 4 Rotten Reunion. I think with the amount of mill we have, we can probably get away with 3. And there are obviously going to be some matchups where this isn't great. Like, at best, it's going to make a 2/2. Now, that's not the worst, right? We are going to be a deck that is trying to attack and apply pressure to the opponent. We're trying to get our 3/3s and our 3/1s into play very early on. And so just making an extra 2/2 for 1 mana isn't the end of the world if the opponent isn't playing a graveyard deck. And we can obviously discard it to Haunted Dead. If we mill it over, it's just going to sit in the graveyard. And the nice thing about this card is you don't need to exile the card to create a 2/2. So if you are just short of lethal, you can just make an extra token with this. But I think 3 copies is enough that you'll see it from the amount of mill you've got if you are against another graveyard deck. And then I kind of like going up to 3 Haunted Dead as well, because I do feel like we're running enough cards. We're running 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess Haunted Dead as well. We're basically running like 16 or 17 cards that we don't really want to draw. So having a 3rd Haunted Dead in the deck does mean that we're very likely to be able to just discard a Prized Amalgam if we draw it as well. So that does mean that we've only really got room to run 1 of these as a 2 of, and I think out of these 2, I'm much more interested in the Secret Keeper, just because it's, the difference between 1 mana mill 4 and 2 mana mill 5, the difference between 1 and 2 mana here is so huge, and you also do get a creature off the Secret Keeper as well, so I think I'm going to start off with 2 Merfolk's Secret Keeper here, and then I think, I could potentially see an argument to going down to 19 lands because of the hand smoother. I think 19 lands does mean that you're likely to find 2 lands. And the way I kind of see this deck, as long as you have 2 lands and you have both blue and black mana, so I'm going to run basically all of the blue-black dual lands, then I think you've got, as long as you keep 2 mill spells and 2 lands, then you're pretty much good to go with this deck. You know, the really nice thing about Otherworldly Gaze, having played this sort of style of deck, is that even if you exhaust both of your mill spells, you're very likely to find the first copy of this, which then enables you to keep milling from the graveyard. So I think the key with this deck from playing it so far is make sure you've got both colours, make sure you have 2 lands, and ideally you want 2 mill spells as well. And then the deck kind of just works on its own from that point onwards. So, I mean, we'll have to see. I've not tried to build with Rotten Reunion. I've not tried to build with Secret Keeper either. I was running Oglaw and Best of 3, but I feel like this has to be good, right? Just because it makes the deck a lot faster. So I think I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to pause the recording now and just build the mana base separately, because building the mana base isn't the most exciting thing. So I'm just going to put it together, and then once I've built it, I'll explain the choices as I've done them. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've just built the mana base here, and it's nothing too special at all, really. I obviously want to run all of the good blue-black dual lands, because we're trying to operate from a low land amount. So if you're running a lot of lands that can only produce one colour, you're going to end up having to mulligan hands where you have, 2 or 3 good mill spells because you don't have both colours. So we obviously want the Watery Grave, Underground River, Dark Six Shores and the Pathway for sure, just to help us have both colours of mana in the early game. And then outside of that, I've just gone for 2 basics, Ottawara and Takenuma. Now, there were some other lands that were considerations. So you could potentially think about running the Creature lands, but because you're at a low land count, so that is very unlikely to mess you up being untapped later in the game. But like I said, with a 20 land deck, I imagine you're not going to find your 4th or 5th land, so this is basically never going to come up. The other land that I was definitely considering is Ipnu Rivulet. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's basically a blue land that also enables you to mill yourself, which seems interesting. But my main concern with this is that in Best of 1, we're already running 4 pain lands, and then if we also start running Ipnu Rivulets as well, we're going to be dealing ourselves a lot of damage. And there are decks like Is It Wizards and Burn and stuff like that that can really punish you for taking a lot of damage. And having played this deck a little bit in Best of 3, the fact that you can mill with Otherworldly Gaze, and we have tons of mana sinks like Haunted Dead from the graveyard, I feel like you're not really going to run out of stuff to do with your mana with this deck. If I do play this and I do find myself in spots where I've used all my mill spells and then I don't have much to do with my mana, then I could definitely see, cutting the island, the Ottawara, and maybe even the Takenuma for some Ipnu Rivulets, just to give you some extra redundancy for stuff to do in the mana base. But I don't really want to be dealing myself extra damage off the Rivulets, if that makes sense. So this is the deck. I'm pretty happy with the first draft of it. So what I'm going to do now is just run it through a Best of 1 event, see how it does, and then if I feel I want to make changes, I'll make some few tweaks and then run it back again. But yeah, we'll just see how it goes. I'll see you in the gameplay. Okay, sweet. Here we go. Okay, so we're going first, and yeah, this hand looks sweet. I think as long as you've got a hand with 2 lands and at least 2 mill enablers, that's good. And we've got potentially 2 of the most powerful ones, right? I think Glimpse and Mesmeric Orb are probably the best quality mill spells, and we've got Secret Keeper on 1 as well. Now, obviously having Narcomoeba and Haunted Dread isn't ideal, but we have so many of these cards that we want to mill that you're going to draw them or have them in your opening hands some number of the time, so you can't always avoid that. So going to lead on the Secret Keeper mill here, and we did hit a Prized Amalgam, which is a decent start. And then next turn, again, I think speed is the most important thing here, particularly since we're against the Yorion deck, so could be against control. Okay, Breeding Pool, interesting. I mean, I'm definitely going to lead on Glimpse. Like I said, speed is the most important thing, so I think you almost always want to go Glimpse on 2, unless you're worried about counter spells for whatever reason. And we hit a Creeping Chill and a Silver Smoke Ghoul, so that's great. We get to get the Ghoul and the Amalgam into play here, which is really nice. I'm going to set a stop during my upkeep here so that you can Otherworldly Gaze before the draw step, hopefully to find another land so that I can go Gaze and then find a land to cast Mesmeric Orb, ideally. Okay, interesting. So opponent's on Sultai, so it could be Sultai Ultimatum if I had to guess. Okay, interesting. So we found another land, which is great. And then I think since we're playing the Mesmeric Orb, which will mill whatever we keep on top after the land, we might as well just bin everything so that we get closer to targets that we actively want to mill, if that makes sense. Going to attack first here just in case they kill the Prized Amalgam, and then we can get it back with the Mesmeric Orb mills potentially, and then we'll just pass it back. So yeah, Sultai and Yorion from the opponent. I have to imagine it's Ultimatum. I can't really think of any other Yorion deck that would be in Sultai, unless they're playing like just a Sultai Blink deck maybe. Okay, they pass back, so we get 5 mils off the Mesmeric Orb. This is kind of another reason why I like going for Glimpse the Unthinkable before Mesmeric Orb, because then the Orb just starts tapping for... starts milling for way more because we'll have more tap permanents in play. So interesting spot here. We could go for Otherworldly Gaze again to try and main phase a Creeping Chill, but I feel at this point the main thing I'm worried about is a sweeper. So I think I'm just going to hardcast the Narcomoeba here, and then if the opponent does have like a Languish or something, we can just go Otherworldly Gaze to start trying to refill the graveyard and get these Amalgams and Silver Smoke Ghouls back again. Oh, they just scoop it up. Okay, so I mean that was a great start. Okay, sweet, we're on the play, and yeah, this hand looks sick, right? Otherworldly Gaze into double Glimpse. I think Glimpse is probably the most powerful enabler in the deck, so having 2 is going to be really sick. I think we want to bin all 3 of these, to be honest. We already have enough lands. We obviously want to mill the Narcomoeba in the Britain Reunion as well. And I went for the main phase Otherworldly Gaze there rather than instant speed in case we happen to hit Silver Smoke Ghoul Creeping Chill, because Silver Smoke Ghoul only re-enters from the graveyard if you had Creeping Chill go off during your turn. So I think it's usually best to Otherworldly Gaze during your turn for that reason. Looks like opponents on a self-mill deck as well, so I'm glad we've got a bit of Reunion here. If I had to guess, I'd probably say they're on Reanimator because of Mardu. But yeah, that was a sick hit off Glimpse, right? We got Silver Smoke Ghoul and 2 Prized Amalgams, so we've got, what is that, 10 power into play already, essentially, which is so strong. I think because it looks like the opponent's on Reanimator, we are going to consistently have to keep open mana for Rot Reunion, but considering we're going to be so far ahead on board, that's not going to be an issue at all. So I have to see what the opponent does here. They could obviously go for Priest of Fell Rights here, but having Bitter Reunion in the graveyard is basically going to lock them out. So this is kind of the reason why I'm excited about this deck with Rotten Reunion, because I feel like it has an interesting spot in the metagame where, you know, you're a very powerful generic deck, but you're also good against other graveyard decks because of Rotten Reunion as well. Okay, so opponent definitely on Reanimator, so they've got Titan of Industry in the graveyard. So we can only, I mean, having drawn a second Rotten Reunion, we could play a 2-mana card here, but I think I'm just going to go for Otherworldly Gaze here and use Rotten Reunion from the graveyard to stop them reanimating. So I don't think we really need any more lands, and I think Stitcher's Supplier isn't bad here, right? We kind of just want more mill to keep going, try and find some Creeping Chills to get back the Silver Smoke Ghouls and stuff like that, and then we'll just pass it back. Opponent's already down to 5 already, and Reanimator's fair game plan is not going to be able to beat ours. I mean, the main thing I'm concerned about with this deck is I don't see a good way for it to beat decks like Elves or Heliod Combo or Angels, but I think that's, you know, there's basically no best of one deck that doesn't have actively bad matchups, and this does seem like a generically powerful deck that also is good against other graveyard decks, which I think is a fine place to be in the meta. So since we've got a second Rotten Reunion here, I'm just going to fire this one off now. Usually you want to wait for them to target their reanimation stuff, but considering we've got a second one in hand, I feel pretty confident just going up for one now. And it applies more pressure here, right? They're forced to block now because we made that 2-2. Now, they've got a pretty free block with the Stitches Supplier, so they could just... Oh, they block with the Priest as well. Okay, so that tells me they probably don't have another reanimation target in hand. And I'm pretty confident about this spot now, right? Like, the quickest they can reanimate here is with a Priest of Fell Rights. The only other, like, reanimation card that can go off straight away is, like, Unburial Rights or Assemble from Parts, which costs 4 mana minimum. So I'm pretty happy just going for Otherworldly Gaze here, and then just having access to this one bit of Rotten Reunion should stop them from reanimating. I mean, to be honest, I don't think there's anything that they could do this turn to both pitch a reanimation target and immediately reanimate it, because 2 mana is the cheapest in the format, and you need to untap with Priest of Fell Rights in order to do that. They do have another Collective Brutality, so that might buy them another turn, but again, I'm really not too worried about this spot, right? The fair game plan of Reanimator isn't going to be able to beat what we're doing. So I'm not going to fire off the Rotten Reunion because I feel like I just want to save it for in case they try and reanimate something. I think I'm just going to go for the Haunted Dead here. We could go for Otherworldly Gaze, but at least this guarantees getting back the Prized Amalgam from the graveyard, and also puts an extra 3 power into play here, while still enabling us to keep up the Rotten Reunion. I mean, again, I don't even think they could possibly reanimate something this turn, but at worst, we can just make a 2-2 token. Yeah, okay, sweet, we got there. Nice. Okay, so we're on the play here, and I've got mulligan this because we have no mill. This isn't great either, right? Glimpse is one of the best mill spells, but I think you want at least 2 mill cards in your opening hand. Okay, definitely going to keep this. Definitely put back the Creeping Chill. And then I'm not sure whether we want the third land or the Secret Keeper here. Or maybe the Mesmeric Orb is to put back as well, because I don't know if you need to. And it is definitely slower than the Secret Keeper. I actually, thinking about it, yeah, I think I probably should have put a land back there and kept the Secret Keeper just for speed, because Mesmeric Orb is a little bit slow. And so, Secret Keeper potentially milling over a creature that we can get into play would be really good. So, yeah, I think I'm thinking about it, I probably should have just thought about that for a little bit longer and put back one of the lands and kept a Secret Keeper, because this deck is kind of built to operate on 2 lands. I don't think we necessarily need that third land, so yeah, I think that was a misplay. So it looks like we're against Red-White Thopters. Hopefully they don't have Portable Hole for Mesmeric Orb, because that would slow us down quite a lot. But yeah, thinking about it, I definitely should have kept the Secret Keeper, because speed is very important, particularly against other decks like this. Wow, they do have the Portable Hole. So again... Oh, wow, and Esper Sentinel, yikes. So, yeah, I think not keeping that Secret Keeper on 1 has slowed us down quite a lot here. We did draw another Mesmeric Orb. I mean, again, this is kind of a slow start, but, it could still very well get us there. If we can get 2 Mesmeric Orbs into play, I do think the Red-White Thopters deck doesn't have that much stuff outside of Shadow Spear that can, get past a bunch of blockers if we can keep bringing creatures back from the graveyard every single turn. But, yeah, I think this game does look quite a bit differently if we keep the Secret Keeper and then mill something good off the first 4. But having said that, if the opponent does have Esper Sentinel and we got stuck on 2 lands, that could also be awkward because we're giving them cards. But again, like I said, Red-White Thopters doesn't really have great ways to stop chump blockers unless they have Shadow Spear. And we do have Narcomoebas that have flying that can block their stuff like Ornithopters if they start buffing them with Machikos. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, Mesmeric Orb is kind of slow, but the great thing about it is that it just gives us inevitability, basically. Okay, so we didn't hit anything that gives us immediate board presence. Now, we could go Mesmeric Orb and Otherworldly Gaze here, but that would give them a card off the Esper Sentinel, and I don't really want to be doing that. I think I'm just going to pay the 1, play a tap land, and then pass back here, because not only would the extra draw get them potentially closer to a Shadow Spear, but it could also draw them into a Portable Hole. We also have nothing on board yet, so if it draws them into a Machiko's Reign of Truth or something like that, then that really increases their clock as well. So interesting, Hushbringer... Does Hushbringer stop Prized Amalgam? It might do, actually. So hopefully they don't have Hushbringer either. I know that Strict Proc just shuts it down. I'm not 100% sure if Hushbringer does as well. I imagine it does. But, I mean, either way, we're going to start milling 8 cards here. So I imagine we'll hopefully mill something here. I'm going to set a stop during the upkeep just so we can Otherworldly Gaze into something good, hopefully. Okay, there's an Amalgam. That's a good start. Okay, land isn't ideal. Another land isn't ideal. Okay, another Amalgam's pretty good, though. Bit of Reunion not great in this matchup, obviously. I mean, it can be good if we need to shut them off getting stuff off Lurrus, but I'm going to go for Otherworldly Gaze here and pay the 1 for Sentinel and just try and hit, set up for a good draw step and potentially bin something else that's impactful. Okay, there's a Creeping Chill. Definitely going to bin all 3 of these. I don't know if we've binned a Silver Smoke Ghoul yet, so I don't think we're getting any creatures back this turn, which is pretty concerning considering we're staring down quite a lot of damage here. So we could play the Underground River here, but I feel like I want to keep 2 cards in my hand to discard to the Haunted Dead next turn. Right, if we had another card in hand, if we hadn't mulliganed a bunch, we could play Underground River, use the Haunted Dead, get a 1/1 that's unblocked, and then get back all 3 Prized Amalgams, which is obviously really sick. And we are basically dead to Machiko's Reign of Truth and Yotia declares war here, so I think we are getting punished for making a bad mulligan decision earlier. If I'd kept the Secret Keeper, I think we'd have been off to a lot of a faster start. But yeah, we'll see how... If they have a thing to buff their creatures here, then we lose. But if we get to untap, like I said, I don't know if Red-White Thopters has that many great ways to fight through all the chump blockers that we have. I mean, annoyingly, a lot of them do enter play tapped from the graveyard, like the Amalgam and the Silver Smoke Ghoul, but Narcomoeba enters into play untapped. And Creeping Chill is obviously good at buffering our life total as well. And obviously the Haunted Dead. So even if we don't hit anything good off the Mesmeric Orbs, we can still at worst go Haunted Dead, get a 1/1 that can block, and then get back all the 3 Prized Amalgams. Yeah, the fact the opponent's in the tank here probably means that they don't have a Machikos or a Yorion, or I imagine they would just slam that and go for lethal. I mean, we are kind of representing Fatal Push, but, you know, we don't have any blockers in play. There's no real disadvantage to them just attacking with everything here. Okay, they don't have Machikos or Yorion, which is huge. So we do survive this turn, and I think, you know, we're at the point now where we're milling 6 cards with the Mesmeric Orb. We can still go Haunted Dead, that we should be able to put enough stuff on the board, hopefully now, where we don't have to worry about dying on the crackback, but we'll see. They do pass with Mana Open, though, which is odd. Maybe they're just trying to activate the Retrofit Foundry, but, you know, thankfully we don't have to worry about Metallic Rebuke or anything like that. Although, having said that, you know, most of our game plan kind of bypasses counter spells anyway, because it's entering from the graveyard. So opponent's in the tank here about something. Okay, there's a Narcomoeba, that's a great start. So that automatically gets back all the amalgams and gives us a blocker in addition to the Haunted Dead one that we're going to get. Okay, there's a second Narcomoeba, that's great. Let's see what else we hit. Okay, another Ghoul. We'd love to hit another Creeping Chill. Okay, I mean, that's not too bad. I think here I'm just going to fire off Creeping Chill and pay for the one. They could be main decking Mana Tithe, but I very much doubt that. I don't think it's worth playing around. I don't want to give them the extra card. And going for Creeping Chill here not only buffers our life total so that we're less worried about dying to an attack next turn, but it also gets back all these Silver Smoke Ghouls. I think we have at least 3 in the graveyard right now, so... And we obviously get back all the Prized Amalgams as well, so... Hitting those Narcomoebas was pretty clutch, but we had whiffed on a lot of mills, so I think, you know, we were eventually going to hit them anyway. Wow, the opponent doesn't do anything. Maybe they're worried about getting milled out here, potentially. But yeah, we're going to be milling a ton next turn, so it's risky for the opponent to attack here because we are inevitably going to hit Creeping Chills, right? Because we have, what was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we have, you know, what, like over 20 cards getting milled off these Mesmeric Orbs next turn, so we're pretty much guaranteed to hit some Creeping Chills unless we get really unlucky, so opponent does need to be careful with what they attack with here. Like, having said that, if they have 2 ways to kill these Narcomoebas, then we're probably just dead on board. Oh, I mean, if they have like Portable Hole, then we are dead on board, but if they had that, then they would have probably used one of them last turn, I imagine. Okay, they go for Yorion, so... And they skip straight to Chapter 2. Okay, so they're probably going to take out either a Silver Smoke Ghoul or a Narcomoeba here. If they take out a Narcomoeba, that might mean they're going a bit more aggressive. Which, like I said, would be risky if they don't have another way to take out the second Narcomoeba. Okay, they do. Maybe they feel like they just have to attack here, but... Wow, they attack with everything. That is kind of a surprise. Maybe they have another creature. I mean, they're not dead on board to what we have in play, right? We obviously have to block with the Narcomoeba here, and then with the Ornithopter, they can block, and then they're only letting 12 damage through. But if we hit a single Creeping Chill, we just win. And we have 22 Mesmeric Orb triggers here. Thankfully, we're not going to, you know, die to decking out, and you do need to be wary of that. Right, if you've got especially multiple Mesmeric Orbs in play, you do need to be worried about decking yourself, but I think we're pretty likely to find another Creeping Chill here, and I don't think there's anything that the Thopters deck can run that can stop us. Okay, there's another Narcomoeba. Okay, there we go. I was worried that they would all be in the last few cards of our library. Okay, opponent just scoops it up. So yeah, I think we kept a bad hand there, but we still managed to get there. Okay, so we're going first here, and yeah, can't keep this because it's just got no mill. This, on the other hand, is sweet, right? We've got Supply and Double Glimpse, so going to put back the Rotten Reunion. Maybe we're supposed to keep that, actually, because we are, you know, we did build the deck to operate on 2 lands. I'm just not used to playing these decks where you don't really need more than 2 lands, so I think, on balance, I was probably supposed to put back the Otawara there instead, but hopefully it won't end up mattering. We'll see. So we'll see what the opponent's on here. Okay, Snow-Covered Plains, could be a number of things. So we're going to attack with the Supply here and just go for a Glimpse, see what we hit. Wow, okay, that's not bad. So we get back in Narcomoeba, and I think we've got a couple of Prized Amalgams. Okay, only 1 Prized Amalgam, but that's still not bad, right? Turn 2, we've already got 5 power in play, which is pretty sick. And we've got a second Glimpse here as well, so... Okay, I think I'll attack first just in case they try and kill the Prized Amalgam. Because if we go for Glimpse first and hit a Narcomoeba and then they kill the Prized Amalgam, we won't get it back. Okay, little unfortunate to not hit a Creeping Chill, but now we have a ton of Silver Smoke Ghouls in the graveyard, so if we can find a Creeping Chill here, I think we're really good. Wow, okay, Angel of Eternal Dawn, wasn't expecting that. Maybe the opponent's on Angels, like Black-White Angels, or maybe Lifegain or something like that. Either way, I'm just going to send in with everything here. Like, if they want to block the Narcomoeba, that's fine. We just want to try and race. So put opponent down to 10, and I think we'll just go for both the Otherworldly Gazes and see what we hit here. Okay, definitely want to bin the Haunted Dead, and I think I want to keep the Mesmeric Orb, but I'm going to bin the Secret Keeper. Maybe we're supposed to just go hard to try and find a Creeping Chill, but I feel like we are running out of mill here because we've used both of those Otherworldly Gazes, so getting the Mesmeric Orb here should help us just keep being able to churn through the deck. Okay, so opponent misses their 4th land drop and just passes it back. I think I'm just going to lead on attacking here, right? If they want to just block the Amalgam, that's fine. Then we get in for a point of damage. And I'd be quite happy for them to block the Supply here as well, because then, you know, that could potentially mill us into a Creeping Chill, which then puts tons of power into play. So, I mean, I am worried if they are playing Angels, because I do feel like that's a matchup that's going to be really difficult to win. But they are off to a very slow start, so... Okay, so we don't hit anything great there. So the two options we have here is we can either Haunted Dead or we can just hard cast the Silver Smoke Ghoul here. I kind of like going for the Ghoul just because it guarantees more power on the battlefield to allow us to apply pressure. And also, I guess it doesn't really change the amount that we mill off the Mesmeric Orb, but at least if we go Silver Smoke Ghoul, the opponent might then kill it, which we can get it. Oh, wow. Okay. That kind of sucks. So now I'm kind of regretting going for the Ghoul instead of the Haunted Dead, but I really wasn't expecting Heliod's intervention. So that kind of sucks. Now we're out of mill enablers, but we do have a lot of other stuff that we can draw to get us going again. If we draw Creeping Chill off the top, we're good. If we draw any other mill enablers, we're good. So, plus we still have Rotten Reunion that can put extra stuff into play. And we can also sack the Silver Smoke Ghoul to draw us a card, which could be pretty big as well. I imagine they block the Silver Smoke Ghoul here, in which case we can just sack in response and get him for 3. That also puts them lower on life so that the Sigarda's Splendor doesn't really do much. Oh wow, we draw another Narcomoeba, that kind of sucks. I think we're just going to go for Haunted Dead here, because that at least gets back the... I think we've got at least one more Prized Amalgam in the graveyard already, so... Pitch the Narcomoebas, but we get a 2-2 and a 1-1 into play, and then we get the 2 Prized Amalgams back as well, so... Even though we did kind of run out of mill this game, we still managed to... you know, get a ton of stuff back onto the board. Opponent's already down to 4. Well, having said that, they have got Splendor, so I imagine they've probably got other ways to gain life here. But, I mean, thankfully they have had a slow start. Wow, Path of Pro. Okay, that just doesn't do anything, thankfully. But yeah, I do feel like Angels is going to be a tough matchup if they get off to a fast start. But thankfully the opponent didn't there, so nice. Okay, so we're on the play here, and even with the Mesmeric Orb, we can't keep that. Wow, this looks decent though, right? We've got 4 mill cards here, which is really strong, and you know, Glimpse and Mesmeric Orb are 2 of the best cards in the deck as well. So this is a pretty sick start, and we hit an Narcomoeba off the first mill, so that's really nice. So see what the opponent's on here. Okay, 5-blade charger, so probably hammer if I had to guess. Either way, just going to lead on a Glimpse here, see what else we hit. Okay, we did bin some Silver Smoke Ghouls and Prized Amalgams, but didn't get anything to bring them back, unfortunately. But we do have the Mesmeric Orb here, which should be pretty big. So they've only got red mana, so maybe they're not on hammer. Or maybe they've just drawn a slightly awkward draw. I mean, either way, even though this can kill both of our creatures, I don't mind blocking with the supply just to get more mill here. It would be a little bit awkward if we hit the Creeping Chill now, though, because we don't get back the Silver Smoke Ghoul during the opponent's turn. But if we hit another Narcomoeba, we do get back the Prized Amalgams. So we'll see what else they play here. I did think they were potentially on hammer, but maybe they're just on mono red. 5-blade charger is a card that sees play in mono red as well. Either way, Glimpse is another great draw here. Again, we could have gone for the Mesmeric Orb, but I think speed is more important than anything else. So going to go for the the glimpse first, and also glimpse also means that we get creatures into play quicker, which then means we have more tapped permanents for the Mesmeric Orb, which is pretty big as well. So generally you want to play glimpse first, then Mesmeric Orb afterwards, so that you get more mills off the orb. But yeah, we get a decent amount of creatures in play, right? We get three ghouls and a prized amalgam, so not bad for a turn 3 board, getting 12 power into play. I guess we don't get the amalgam back till the opponent's end step, but in a lot of ways that's actually a benefit because it means they can't kill it with sorcery speed removal. Okay, I imagine the opponent's on mono red then. So I'm going to stop doing my upkeep just in case I want to go for Otherworldly Gaze. I kind of doubt I will because I think I almost certainly want to go for Mesmeric Orb instead, but I think it's always worth setting a stop just in case, right? At least if we do, we could go for Otherworldly Gaze, try and find a black land for Stitcher's Supplier, which seems pretty good. But yeah, we'll see what they play first and then decide whether we want to go for that or Mesmeric Orb. I think it's quite close. If we can find a black land off the Otherworldly Gaze before our draw step, I think that is probably better. But if we don't find a black land, it is a little bit annoying. Okay, they just cast... Wait, why do they not cast the Bone Crusher Giant that they have in Exile? I'm kind of confused about that. Oh, wow, sick. Okay, we just draw a land off the top. So I'm going to go for the Mesmeric Orb anyway. Going to attack first just in case they block... Well... If they do block, we can just go, potentially mill stuff off the supplier, which, if we hit a Narcomoeba or something, or a Creeping Chill, we can get back whatever creature they block. So opponent blocking the Prized Amalgam here, which kind of makes sense. Like, if they are playing mono red and they've got like Embercleave or stuff, they do kind of want to have creatures in play, but they're so far behind on board. We're already up to 23 because of the Creeping Chill as well, so I do think the opponent is kind of forced to play defensively here, probably. Obviously in the tank about it, but yeah, we just go, oh well, they don't block. I mean, I'm pretty happy to see that, right? We can just go Supplier and then Mesmeric Orb. Wow, okay, that's a really good hit. So now we get Narcomoeba, we get Creeping Chill, and then we get to get back, the Amalgam and any Silver Smoke Ghouls we've got as well. So yeah, I think unless the opponent has like a Brotherhood's End here, we're pretty easily going to win this one, I think. Even if they do have a Brotherhood's End, all we need to do is just play Haunted Dead and we get back the Prized Amalgams anyway. Right, we can just discard whatever we draw to the Haunted Dead. Yeah, okay, opponent just scoops up. Nice. Okay, sweet. So we're going second, and this looks like a decent hand, right? We don't have any of the 2-mana mill stuff, but we've got Secret Keeper, Supplier, and Secret Keeper and 2 suppliers, which is pretty good. And then Prized Amalgam, not the best. It's not the worst card to hardcast, but we also do have the 3 Haunted Deads in the deck, so if we can mill them over, we can just discard them to the Prized Amalgam to get them back again. So definitely a decent hand. Oh, wow. Okay, opponent's on Toxic. Now, I do normally lead with the Secret Keeper just because milling 4 is obviously leads to faster starts, but considering the opponent's put a 1/1 Death Touch Toxic into play, I think it just makes sense to lead on Supplier here just as a blocker, just stop them getting in for free attack. So we'll see what they do here. Wow, they attack. I mean, we'll snap off a trade here. They might have a combat trick. Wow, no, okay, they just let it die. Sweet. And we get a Narcomoeba back, so that's pretty good. And then we get the Prized Amalgam back as well, so already off to a good start here. I mean, obviously Blue-Black Toxic isn't exactly like a meta deck, but we'll see how this plays out. Now, we could go for 2 suppliers or Secret Keeper plus Supplier here, but I think I'm just going to go for Glimpse because it just represents the most amount of mill. Okay, opponent has a counterspell, so maybe that was a reason to just go for 2 suppliers or a Supplier plus Secret Keeper, but I feel like we're already so far ahead on board that it doesn't really matter, to be honest. So I'm going to attack him with both. I don't really care if they block the 3/3 here because we should be milling so many cards here that if we hit a Creeping Chill or another Narcomoeba or even a Haunted Dead, we should be able to bring the Amalgam back again. So mill with the Supplier. Okay, there's a Creeping Chill, so I think we've got a Silver Smoke Ghoul in the graveyards. We'll just fire off the other Supplier as well, see what else we hit. Okay, there's an Narcomoeba anyway, and a Silver Smoke Ghoul, so yeah. Unless the opponent has a Sweeper here, we should just be good to pretty easily win, I think. Already got a ton of power in play. Even if they do have a Sweeper, unless it's an Exile-based one, we're milling an extra 6 cards off the Supplier as well here, so... Oh, well, opponent just draws 2. Okay, I mean, yeah, this is obviously a slightly easier win, but still shows the speed of the deck for sure. Okay, so we're going first here, and yeah, this hand looks good, right? We've got 3 mill enablers, and obviously not ideal to have Amalgam or Ghoul in our opening hand, but, you know, if we can mill over a Haunted Dead, then we're pretty happy to discard both of those, so... Opponent's on a Lurus deck, so it could be a number of things, obviously. Could be Auras, could be Red-White Thopters, maybe, or maybe Hammer Time as well. I've seen that a few times in Best of One recently. But yeah, either way, almost always want to lead on the Secret Keeper over the Stitcher's Supply, just because, you know, that extra 1 card can enable you to get off to faster starts. Yeah, so for example, the 4th card here was Silver Smoke Ghoul, so had we gone for Supplier instead, we wouldn't have got the turn 1 Silver Smoke Ghoul, so that's obviously a very good start for us. See what the opponent's on here. Okay, Esper Sentinel, interesting. So... don't think it's worth just going for the Stitcher's Supply, for the Mesmeric Orb and giving them a card here. I mean, we'll attack with the Ghoul first. There's a chance they might want to block just to prevent some damage here. And if they do, then we can just slam the Mesmeric Orb. If they don't, I think I probably prefer just going for Stitcher's Supplier here. Although we could go for Haunted Dead, get back the Prized Amalgam, which is an interesting line as well. Be more slightly mana efficient, but we could also just play Secret Keeper Supplier and then... you know, hold the Haunted Dead for in case we draw another Amalgam. But I think it's pretty close. I could definitely see an argument for going Haunted Dead there instead, just to apply more pressure to the board straight away. Thinking about it, that might have been better actually, especially if we're against a deck where we need to race. You know, if we are against Hammer, then trying to kill them before they get a Shadow Spear in play is quite important. But again, this way does mean that if they do have a Hammer that they can equip this turn, we can just block with the Supplier as well. Whereas if we attack with the Ghoul and then go for Haunted Dead, blocking with the 1/1 Flyer isn't that great. Like, getting Supplier in play has the advantage here that it's very annoying for the opponent to attack. Okay, there's Sigarda's Aid, and they choose not to attack. So they could very well have a Hammer here that they want to play at instant speed, so... I mean, I'm kind of tempted to play the Mesmeric Orb pre-combat here, just because that might incentivize them to flash in the Hammer now to get them to draw a card, because if they... flash in the Hammer now, they make Esper Sentinel an 11/11, make us not able to pay the Sentinel tax. They don't choose to do that, which is interesting. So they do have priority, but they could also just have priority for the Blink Moth Nexus. So I think I'm happy to attack with both creatures here, because even if they do have a Hammer, we can still block with the Secret Keeper. And I'd rather attack with both creatures to get an extra mill off the Mesmeric Orb, right? If we don't attack with the Stitcher Supplier and we hold it back, that's 1 less mill that we get off the Mesmeric Orb. Okay, there's the belt, so they do attack. We can just chump block with the Secret Keeper here. And then we'll see what we mill. So we're going to get 5 cards off the Mesmeric Orb here. See what we hit. Okay, 2 lands. Wow, 3 lands, not great. Okay, there's an Amalgam, which isn't bad, though. And then... could go for Haunted Dead here. Well, I think I'm going to attack first. And then... go for Narcomoeba and Haunted Dead, which gets back the Amalgam and puts a 1/1 into play here. So I think no matter what the opponent does here, they're probably not going to be able to attack past, and they're staring down a lot of power as well. So unless they happen to be running like Divine Purge or something crazy like that, I don't think there's any way they can win from here. Unless they have Shadow Spear actually. Okay, sick, we got there. Nice. So we managed to get the 7-0 then, which is pretty good. Now, obviously a couple of those matches were against, you know, non-meta decks. We were up against, like, white-black Angels that had a really slow start. And we also had a match against that Toxic deck as well. So, obviously got some slightly easier wins there. And I did think we got slightly lucky with the matchups as well, because I kind of doubt that this deck has... well, I can't imagine this deck ever has a good matchup against a deck like Elves, Angels or Helioke, so dodging all 3 of those was pretty good, but this does, you know, the deck felt really powerful, and particularly with Rotten Reunion, I like that it has a spot in the metagame where you're also good against the other graveyard decks. But anyway, that was the gameplay. Next up, I'm just going to go over my closing thoughts on the deck, any potential changes that I might make, so I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so overall, I'm really happy with how the deck performed. I definitely don't think it's top tier because, you know, like I mentioned briefly, I very much doubt this deck is ever going to consistently be able to beat decks like Elves, Angels or Helioke, just because we're not running any interaction and those decks are just going way bigger than us. But I think that's fine in best of one, right? There's no best of one historic deck that doesn't have some actively bad matchups, and I think this deck did feel pretty good against most other decks that we tried. I think Rotten Reunion gives the deck a really specific spot in the metagame where this is an all-in graveyard deck that has a good matchup against the other all-in graveyard decks. If you're not running Rotten Reunion, then I'm not sure there's much of a good argument to run this over something like Dragonstorm or Reanimator, but, you know, like I said, having some bad matchups does mean that you're probably not tier 1, right? Elves and Helioke particularly are both popular decks in best of one, and unless you have an insane draw or the opponent has a really clunky start, I very much doubt you're going to be able to beat those decks, unfortunately. In terms of interaction, you know, one way you could improve those matchups is to run interaction, but I've talked about this in the past, but I definitely think specifically in best of one, it's not a good idea to run interaction unless that interaction specifically plays well with your linear game plan, because if you were to run something like Fatal Push in this deck, you're just making your deck way slower against any other deck that's not running creatures, and there are a lot of decks in the format where a card like Fatal Push just isn't good. If there was, I think good examples of decks where you want to run interaction in best of one is stuff like the artifact synergy decks that can run Portable Hole because it's an artifact itself, right? So it counts towards your Mashiko's Reign of Truth and your Nettlesist and your Thought Monitor. You can find it off in Genius Smith, or a deck like Wizards can afford to run burn spells because it triggers all of your creatures. So if there was a black removal spell that was maybe like expensive on the front side but had a cheap flashback cost, for example, like it was maybe a 5 mana instant or sorcery that destroy target creature that you could flashback for 2, I definitely would be interested in playing that, because then it would fill a similar role to Rotten Reunion where we could just mill it over and then cast it for cheap from our graveyard. But since a card like that doesn't exist just in Magic in general, let alone Arena, I don't think you can really afford to be running interaction. Your best bet against other creature decks is to just run as tight and as linear, proactive game plan as possible, and then just try and kill them before they can kill you. Like I said, I do think Elves, Helioke, and Angels are going to be bad matchups, but I think you've got a decent chance at racing a lot of the other creature decks, specifically the red aggro decks. I have also faced Wizards a couple of times with this deck while I've been testing, and it's felt, definitely a winnable matchup there as well. So in terms of potential changes I'd make to the deck, I'm pretty happy with how everything has been working together, honestly. The only consideration for a change here really is maybe running more Secret Keepers instead of Stitcher Suppliers, because getting that extra mill for 1 mana is appealing, but Stitcher Supplier has felt really nice as a blocker against other aggro decks. So I think I do like the split as is. I like the mill cards. Glimpse has been great. Mesmeric Orb has been great. And then in terms of payoffs, I've really liked the numbers as well, right? You want to run 4 of Narcomoeba, Silver Smoke Ghoul, Prized Amalgam, and Creeping Chill, and then Haunted Dead and Rotten Reunion are cards that you want to get in your graveyard every single game, but you don't really want them in multiples. So I think 3 copies has felt like a good number for these. So yeah, I like the build as it is overall. I've been pretty happy with it. Overall, I think the deck's cool. I wouldn't run it without Rotten Reunion, but I definitely think the deck's got an interesting spot in the metagame. Probably not tier 1, but it's been so much fun to play. I've been wanting to play these Dredge-style decks for ages, and Prized Amalgam definitely feels like the missing piece. So if you like these sorts of self-mill decks, definitely check it out, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Big up!